All right, HD, welcome to this episode of the CypherCon podcast, the HD TV edition. Am I the first person to make that lame joke?
This year, yes.
This year, okay, all right. Well, there we go. I guess there hasn't been a lot of TV appearances these days, other than the Zoom. It's kind of in everyone's vernacular these days. But anyway, welcome and thanks for joining me. And I apologize for the terrible joke. And let's jump in right away. And I thought that maybe we could start with your background. How'd you get into this wonderful career and all the achievements that you had for yourselves? Like, what were your early days like? How'd you get into hacking? How'd you get into tinkering and finding exploits and doing all this kind of stuff?
A lot of it just comes out of like being poor and growing up in Texas with no real funding. And so you walk to and from school, you find trash on the ground, you find chunks of computers hanging at a dumpster, you start building stuff, you try to make like one functional computer of all the parts you find. Spent a lot of time sneaking at computer labs, before and after school, and playing around with Apple IIes and just generally trying to get a feel for like how they worked and how to write code. And then kind of that led to getting involved with the kind of the freaking telephone scene here in town, which was pre-internet, dialing in random BBSs, trying to either get access to other BBSs, the whole calling card thing to go, over, long distance calls back then, which were a thing. So generally just trying to explore kind of what the telephone networks look like. And that eventually became a strong focus on wire dialing, which is, dialing huge ranges of numbers from as many modems as I could find, trying to figure out what was out there, connecting to all kinds of random stuff from, HVAC systems tied to large department stores to radio towers and old Unix machines and, Prime OS and everything else in between.
Holy smokes. So you found what made you want to build computers in the first place? Like how did you first, like, can you remember like what your first experience was like, oh, I want to build a computer?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I probably when I got kicked out of school a lot. So every time I got kicked out of school, I lost access to school computers, or I got kicked out of the lab. So I had to find something to play with. So I kept trying to like build parts out of leftovers I found. I would dumpster dove a lot. I pulled things out of the trash everywhere I could find it. It took about a year and a half to build my first 46. And then I was just building, found half a modem here, half a modem there, hard drive over here, a CPU over there, motherboard there. And I finally got the machine set up, and I had a shirt with a pocket in the front. I remember like leaning over, pushing power, hearing that thing finally kick on. The fans were up. I heard the BIOS post beep, and then a penny fell out of my pocket, went right in the motherboard, and shorted the whole thing out, and I discarded from scratch.
Holy smokes, that's awesome. Did you find dumpsters that you had a lot of computers in it? Like, how did you locate? Was it like, okay, this is a computer company or a school, you knew that they're getting rid of computers? Or like, where'd you find these things in the dumpsters?
Everywhere. I mean, apartment complexes were great because people would throw away all kinds of stuff. Telephone companies, for sure. You have to jump the razor wire and stuff to get back there and go through all their junk. All my old telco manuals were pulled directly out of the trash of AT&T back in the day. So I still have like my old OC3 multiplexer manuals and all my old like default login scripts were all basically pulled directly out of the telephone company's trash back then.
Holy smokes, razor wire and everything. You're hardcore, man. That's awesome. You're really dedicated. So how did that, like those early experiences and really love for computers, how did, and freaking and, all that kind of stuff, how did that inform, what you created with Metasploit, what became Metasploit?
Metasploit was kind of like a big Amoeba roll-up project. Like most people know it these days is like the big software package that it is and all the exploits, things like that. But it started off being a research project. And the idea was like, let's start taking all these random ideas and random presentations that our friends have and that we had and start putting them together into one giant container of stuff. So it started off with shellcode development, trying to get shellcode sizes in Windows down really small. We spent a lot of time things like PowerPC shellcode, and then from there, I kind of looked at building out exploits. And at the time, I was working at a MSSP, heading the red team at the time, and we had a crappy pile of tools. We needed better tooling. So we started putting together, this kind of clean version of all the tools that we had. And we realized those tools still sucked because at the time, if you want to swap out the payload, you want to go to bind shell to reverse shell. You had to go rebuild the exploit from scratch. And half the time, the characters that you had to avoid in the shellcode, like null bytes, things like that, were different per exploit per tool. So that really led to the design of like Metasploit's kind of Lego-like model, where you take a payload, you take an exploit, an op, an encoder, and you kind of put them all together to build kind of dynamic exploit runtime and use that. And so I wrote in the language I knew at the time, which is Perl. Managed to convince a couple other smart people to join the team, mostly because they made fun of my code and I told them to do better, so they did. So that was SpoonM and Scape. And then we kind of rolled with that for a couple of years, and it turned into, early on, it was kind of widely panned as a script kiddie tool and people made fun of it. But the idea really was just to stop letting research die in the vine. Like when someone has a cool idea, actually implement it and make it part of this thing that we just keep maintaining going forward. And so if you want to talk, half the time you go to DEF CON, you see a really cool talk. 2 years later, no one remembers that talk, right? You have to really, we want to make research applicable, real world useful. And that's kind of where Metasploit came from and what it became.
That's it. It's kind of like the concept of like continuous deployment, which is kind of ubiquitous now. Everyone's using Agile and that kind of stuff. And when did you originally make Metasploit?
The first code was back in like late 2002. And then I think we had our first release in 2003.
And so that's kind of what you were doing, is like kind of continuously adding on to these things. And it seemed like, that wasn't the thing that you did at the time. And so people are like, what is this, but now it's like, that's the thing that you do, is you're constantly improving, you're constantly adding to your software.
Back then the challenge was exploits weren't something you took for granted. Like a lot of folks thought exploits should be illegal, or that they were illegal and didn't know better. This is back when just port scanning somebody, you locked them in jail. So the whole view of the world was very different back then. People thought exploits were these dangerous things created by criminals, which they were, but they're also useful for pen tests and security auditing and everything else. And if you're working in IDS or a security solution or a firewall, you need exploits to test that too. So it ended up being this kind of weird world where half the security industry desperately depended on having exploits do the job. The other half absolutely hated them. They didn't want them to exist. And Metasploit kind of pushed the bar from moving exploits from this kind of shady underground activity to something that everyone kind of does, use like regular tools, like a port scanner, like anything else.
Huh. Yeah. And so that kind of like, it's like sort of like inventing the gun, it's like you're using this tool and that like you can do it, like you're able to kind of, take all these exploits instead of like having to cherry pick, and, there's some issues with figuring out how to use, different ones or whatever. And, but I guess the other side of it, and I'm curious to learn a little bit about this, is like the same thing with a gun. Like you can be a good guy or a bad guy with a gun, right? And I'm curious to learn about like what was the response from people at the time, as far as like, hey, you're just like giving nefarious hackers like some more tools to be, to hack into things. Like what kind of flack did you get from people? If you did, I don't know for a fact that you did, but what sort of criticisms did you get, and how did you respond to those criticisms, and how did that kind of evolve over time?
Yeah, sure. So all kinds of criticism, like both from my employer, from our customers, from friends, from people on the internet, from random companies. There's everyone and their mom has an opinion about whether you should disclose vulnerabilities, whether you should release exploits. And so we took the brunt of that. We basically just said, we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing. We're gonna keep releasing stuff until someone stops us. And they didn't. And where they tried, we won. Ended up being, I had a large software company trying to get me fired from my job for multiple years, got pulled in front of board hearings, all kinds of crap. So at the end of the day, though, I feel like we made exploits what they are today, which is a tool that you use as part of security work, not as this special, scary. It's not like a virus where it's going to take over your whole network. It's not like something that's wantonly destructive that there is no valid use for. Exploits are a very valid way to test security, to make sure patches are being applied. We kind of turn them from this kind of scary thing people weren't really sure what to do with, to kind of just yet another boring tool in the toolbox. And a lot of people didn't like that. Both folks on the Black Hat side didn't like the fact that our exploits were widely available and often more reliable than their exploits for the same bug, but also that they just didn't like the fact that it was that widely known. Like all the cool mystique that came with like doing exploit development, is less cool when it's widely available, right? So I think we took some of the shine off of exploit dev back then, but I also think it helped raise the bar and also help the rest of the industry accept that exploits were just a tool that you need to use to do your job.
Yeah, I like that, and I think one of the strongest disinfectants is sunlight, right? And so that's what you're doing, is shining a light on like, here's the bugs, here's how you can exploit them, and here's how we can find them, fix them, make it better. And by reporting all of that and having that transparent to the public, it's doing everyone a good, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had a strong focus on IDS evasion back in the day too, because the goal was, let's make it clear that these tools don't actually work. Like you can't build a good IDS for the SMB protocol or the DCRPC protocol. It's really hard to decode those protocols reliably. There's so many different ways to fragment it. Something's out of order, do multi-binds, all this crazy stuff you can do in the protocol itself that none of the defensive tool vendors were taking into account when they built their products. So a lot of what we did in Metasploit was making it very clear, very obvious that the existing security solutions aren't actually working properly and they can't detect these attacks. And that pushed the whole industry to try hard and do things differently. Now, we are where we are today for a bunch of reasons, but I think the work that went into Metasploit's anti-IDS support and protocol evasion definitely helped.
Cool. So what are you working on these days? What's going on?
I mean, what's kind of what got me into security was being able to explore the big unknown. Back then, it was like telephone networks, and it was like scanning IP space. And I spent a lot of time working in Project Sonar, Rapid7, scanning all of IPv4. And I feel like I still love that. I still love the idea of just exploring network spaces. Like the fact that you can pick any numbers in 1 in 4 billion right now, and it's probably a valid device. It's probably a valid server. That's crazy. That you can just like pick a number out of the thin air, and it somehow belongs to someone's printer in Malaysia. That's awesome. So I love that stuff. So I started working on a platform called Rumble Network Discovery, which is to help companies identify all their network connected assets internally and externally. So instead of it being like an internet-wide scan, we're constantly we're running a scan across the whole internet. Our customers scan their own stuff with their own hardware, with our agents installed, and it builds a big inventory of all the things. And the idea is that we take all the cool techniques from kind of the pen testing red team side of the house, things like doing segmentation analysis, identifying topologies, finding information links to tell you about secondary interfaces, things like that. Really small information links you can use to determine exactly what a device is. And then combining that with the IT side of the house, which things like SNP enumeration, object ID databases, lots of fingerprinting, things like that. So you try to kind of combine both sides and give you a really good view of what's on the network without credentials really quickly. So we've got a free version. It works for most folks. It's like under 256 assets, which most homes, most small businesses can use it for free. And it's a lot of fun. So it's a fun tool for, if you look at tools like NNAP or other scanning tools, they're very focused on telling you what services a particular device is running. We focus very much on telling you what that device actually is and how it's connected.
Huh, interesting. And do you find that a lot of small businesses like have stuff on the network? They're like, what is this? Or like, is that kind of like one of the benefits that you bring to some of these companies?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we help out, oftentimes someone just scans the networks they know about, but typically find about 20% more stuff than they had. Once we help them find what all the other networks are, the ones that aren't being covered with their current vuln management, then it's usually 40%. Like we just find so much more stuff because we look for it differently. And it's a different model. There's a lot of things that wouldn't really be safe to scan with standard security tools. We have a custom scan engine that's designed to be, safe to use in clinical environments, OT, ICS, everything like that. So not to infomercial soapbox too much, but I think it's a cool way to explore networks, and it's much safer to use than your standard security scanners.
Cool. No, feel free to soapbox away. I mean, I'm happy to learn about what you're doing, and if it provides value to other folks,
A lot of stuff is just it's just rolling up all the techniques from like Metasploit, pre-Metasploit days, internet scanning days. So there's a bunch of open, like the tool itself is commercial, but we have a bunch of open source projects we contribute back to. We maintain a MAC address database in conjunction with the DeepMac folks. We have this giant fingerprint database we work on that's the same fingerprint database used by Nexpose and by Metasploit and Metasploit Pro is the same one we're using in Rumble as well. So that fingerprint database is called Recog, and it's a great way to fingerprint anything, basically. So we've been dumping data into that, trying to find ways to fingerprint more stuff. We work with the Rapid7 teams. They add fingerprints for Project Sonar, internet-wide scanning. We add stuff for stuff that our customers see internally. And we're just trying to make a much better set of tools to help fingerprint what's out there.
That's awesome. That was something so I think before we got started, I mentioned that I had this cybersecurity startup, and we kind of had a lot of, idea. We never actually fully went into, building a product. We were looking for a paid customer first type thing. But one of the things that we found is just by searching Shodan and finding, these different devices all over the place, and finding out, what version of Linux they're running, and knowing that there's, these known exploits or, that aren't patched, from that version and stuff like that. So, we were thinking about how can we, take this information and let the companies know, and let them know how to make sure that they know, what devices are on their network, what they're running, and where the potential exploits are and stuff. And that's what you're doing. So, or I should ask, is that what you're doing? And how's it going?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of folks doing just external these days. You've got folks like BitDiscovery, Census, Shodan, of course, a bunch of other folks that do external monitoring. We focus on doing mostly internal corporate networks. So we do lots of large hospitals, lots of large enterprise, state governments, things like that. And The cool thing about that is we're able to help them explore their internal network, stuff that you never see on show because it's never been exposed, right?
Right.
We see devices that you wouldn't see anywhere else, like strange radio towers, microwave links, all kinds of crazy clinical gear, all kinds of weird industrial stuff that if you see it on the internet, it's already a problem, but we see a lot of it internally. So it's kind of cool being able to work in a space that is kind of like the lesser seen side of network discovery.
Cool. And you mentioned a couple times Project Sonar. I'm not familiar with it. Can you just tell me a little bit about what Project Sonar is?
Yeah, so Metasploit was a good way to get sued, and Project Sonar was a really good way to get sued too. So when I was working at Rapid7, we started this research project where it was very Shogun-like. We're going to go scan the whole internet constantly, and then we're going to give all the data away for free. So we kept doing that. We did that for about, I think it's still running now. So the team still has an open data platform. But the cool thing about that is all the bulk data is free. You can go download gigs and gigs and gigs of just raw data and comb through it. And that data includes like a full DNS database of the entire internet, like billions of records of every host name ever. Pulled out of server transparency, TLS, web crawling, link discovery, all kinds of stuff. So it's a really cool data set to do data mining on, to build fingerprints from, just to learn more about how the internet works.
Wow. And so you mentioned it's a good way to get sued. Have people come after you and tried to sue you, and like how, if you're comfortable talking about it, obviously, if it's something you can't talk about.
Ran into all kinds of fun stuff. Like there's a couple iterations of the project before it became Project Sonar. One of them, I got like indicted on a grand jury for subpoena. Like it never actually went to court. They finally dropped the case before it got there, but lots of scary letters, lots of scary stuff. Basically, if you're scanning the entire internet, then if there's any compromise, any criminal activity anywhere, your IP is also in the log. So they just say, okay, let's pull all the IPs that we ever saw in this box at this time period. And obviously, they're all criminals, even though we're just scanning everything all the time. So we also had folks like CISO for state government get really mad that we're scanning IT devices in the state over the internet. I'm like, everyone else is scanning you already, right? Like, yes, but we know who you are. I'm like, yeah, because we're telling you who we are. Like, we're trying to be upfront and open about this. But they got really mad and demanded that we never scan any computers anymore in that particular state. And it was quite silly. But they wouldn't tell us what their IP space was because they didn't know either. So that turned into like a week long, like doing all the research to figure out what their IP space was so we could stop scanning it so they would know their IPs. And they never replied to any of our emails. But lots of chaos, lots of threats, lots of scary letters.
Wow, holy smokes. So what was, when you started doing this, you probably anticipated that was going to happen, right? And what was your, what's your strategy behind that? It sounds like it's just like be open and transparent and honest as possible. But
full on and get through it, right? That's the thing about Metasploit too. Like I had my name on the whole thing going through the project. I never used like a handle or anything like that. So we got a lot of DDoS attacks. We got a lot of death threats. We got all kinds of crazy angry hate mail all the time. But it's fine. Now that it's done, no one cares anymore, right? But it was trying to make it the norm, trying to make exploits the norm, just like we try to make scanning the norm with Project Sonar. Shodan was already doing an awesome job of making it kind of a standard thing people knew about, but there were very few like large security companies doing active internet-wide scanning at the time. So it was a good way to like put another name behind it and make it feel like it's something that people should be doing more and they shouldn't be treating like a criminal activity.
Wow, that's awesome. That's super courageous. My hat's off to you. When you're going through this, did you have a lot of anxiety around I can't imagine what that's like if you have like whole state agencies coming after you.
It's just not much fun sometimes, but it was worth it, right? I feel like that made things normal. That made things, it opened the door for other people to work on similar projects, right? I feel like because of Metasploit, people weren't scared to publish exploits anymore. Because of Project Sonar, other companies were willing to get involved with internet-wide scanning and contribute back to these kind of global research. So I feel like those are the table stakes. You have to put some risk out there to make it normal, and that's what we did.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm amazed that you have the courage and like the tenacity to do this, and it worked out. You did like raise the bar on transparency and security, and you were part of the architect that made it of what it is today. So that's amazing.
It was a huge community, right? It was, Project Sonar was a huge team. It was our lawyers were very helpful too. It was nice working for a large company when that was going on because they could help cover me a little bit. Metasploit was just, I think almost like 300 people by 5 or 6 years in. So it was a huge community as well. And those folks are still contributing. It's still an awesome group of people to work with. So it was just really great being able to work with all these folks who care about the same things and really want to, see the status quo change.
That's awesome. Well, do you have any, final words of advice or plugs or where people can find you that you want to share before we sign off here?
Sure. Yeah, probably easiest is Twitter these days. My DMs are open, just hdmore. And then on GitHub, HDM is my handle there for any projects working on these days. Rumble.run is what I do for work these days. That is rumble.run on the website. And then you can also reach me at hdm@rumble.run as well with my email. But yeah, I think the only thing I can really recommend is one of the challenges I run into like starting new projects is that I feel like I overthink them, and it takes me a long time to finally feel comfortable with the new thing that I want to do. And what usually works better is just to shut up and do it. Like just go face down and just do, 2 weeks straight of work on that thing. And then 2 weeks into it, okay, feel like, okay, did I make enough progress so that I understand where this thing is going, where I want it to be, or is this a complete waste of time? But trying to judge it before you really spend a good 2 weeks of effort on it, I don't think works. And so anybody who wants to start in the business or explore an idea, start a research project, I feel like you need at least 2 weeks in before you can really make that call.
Cool, that's awesome. And that was one other thing I forgot to ask you about. I read your paper on, I think it was Metasploit and money or something like that. And I thought it was a really cool paper because it kind of went through like the whole, act of monetizing and like what went into, figuring out how to, I think you were leasing out the software or like how to monetize it. And I thought that, in addition to what you just said, like, is there any advice that you have to folks that, maybe they're working on, a passion project or a side hustle or something, and they're looking to monetize it or turn it into a full-time gig? Like, do you have any advice to folks? And I'll actually link that paper that I read, because I thought, even though I think you wrote it a few years back now, but I found it to be interesting to get that insight in, how you went about, like with the merger and acquisition people and stuff like that. I was just like, this is really good insight. So, but yeah, do you have any advice on that end?
Sure. I mean, that paper was written probably about 10 years ago now, so it's a little bit dated, but
yeah.
HBR, like Harvard Business Review, actually did a study of the Metasploit acquisition as well. So they've got their own document to put together, which I think the one we wrote for Black Hat was better. I think it went into more depth, but it was neat to see kind of, because at the time there was nothing really to buy. So perhaps someone bought Metasploit. Metasploit was just an MIT licensed code base and a domain name, and that was really it. There was no like assets to really purchase. So we ended up going from 33,000 users at the time and no real assets, no real income outside of training, to millions of dollars of revenue on a commercial product, but also keeping the open source open. And that whole transition, all the weird stuff we ran into, the paper kind of covers a lot of the issues that we ran into with like companies kind of taking the software and competing against us with it for a while, things like that. I think the only main advice I have these days is the GPL is not your friend when it comes to commercializing your own software. If you have any plans to commercialize your software going forward, do not use the GPL. Find any other license. Stick with MIT, BSD, something else, or go commercial with your license, but don't use the GPL. It's just going to cause you like light years of pain.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, I'll link to that in the show notes and all the other links that you mentioned. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. This has really been fascinating to listen to your story. And yeah, so thanks a lot.
Thanks, no problem. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye.